Hey students, my name is Brandon, and today I want to talk to you about fear. Fear is an emotion and a bad vibe, which if we're not careful can control us in unhealthy ways. We've all experienced fear in some form or another. It keeps us from trying new things, it hurts our friendships, and it can tell us lies about ourselves. Fear is common in all of our lives, no matter our age, but our fears can change as we grow up. If you're with your group, take a moment and pause this video to tell your group about something that you were scared of when you were little that you aren't scared of any longer. Our fears often come from wondering, what if? We have this fear side of us that comes up with all this crazy what ifs, and the what ifs make us feel a bit crazy. They make our world shrink until our world is pretty much made up of whatever's making us afraid. Often stressing over our fears can take up most of our day. We think our potential problem, try to figure out the solution for every possible scenario, and to try to plan out what to do and say. When bad vibes like fear take over in our lives, our world becomes the fear. Everything starts and revolves around it. The good news is Jesus had a lot to say about fear, and I believe his words can be an example for us even today. Jesus had 12 close friends who followed him around and learned from him. He was their teacher and they were his disciples. One day, Jesus and his disciples took a boat ride across the sea, and in Matthew 8:24 it says, "Suddenly a ferocious storm came upon the lake so that the waves swept over the boat. Jesus and his disciples were on a small boat in the middle of the water, and without warning, a storm shows up, waves, wind, rain, and thunder all around them while they're in a tiny little boat. And what is Jesus doing in the middle of this crazy storm? This dude is sleeping, of all things." The disciples were scared out of their minds and worried about their lives, and their fearless leader was sleeping right through it. So naturally, they wake him up and say, "Lord, save us, we're gonna drown." The disciples are frustrated, they feel alone, and most of all scared, and they want their leader to calm them down, and he is sleeping. Jesus responds by saying, "You of little faith, why are you afraid?" The disciples are freaked out, soaked and miserable, and don't know what to do. But Jesus wasn't paying attention to that, what was in front of him. He was teaching them something. He was teaching them about fear. So he gets up, but he doesn't panic. And in doing so, makes a point. No matter how scary the circumstances, Jesus stays calm. Then Jesus speaks to the wind and the waves. He basically tells the storm to shut up, and the whole storm goes away instantly. The disciples were so amazed. They responded by saying this, "What kind of man is this? Even the winds and the waves obey him?" They were like, "Who is this man that can calm down a storm? He has such power, and he used it to take care of them. And he was never afraid." In a moment, their confidence in Jesus overwhelmed their fear of the storm. And that's the whole point of this little field trip Jesus took them on, to show them that their feelings of fear didn't have to control them or boss them around, to show them that there's someone bigger and more capable than whatever's in front of them. But Jesus isn't done teaching them about fear. Later on, he then sends his disciples on another boat ride, and they're probably thinking, "Too soon, Jesus. Remember what happened last time?" But they get in the boat anyway, except, plot twist, Jesus doesn't get in with them. He tells them that he'll meet them on the other side of the sea. So the disciples spend the night rowing, and at some point in the night, the waves get bigger and the wind starts to blow. And they have to be thinking, "Great, we're about to be in another storm again, but this time, Jesus isn't with us." Then they look out to the water and they see what they think is a ghost, and they are freaking out. But it turns out it's Jesus walking on the water. Kind of freaky, right? Then Jesus says something that gets their attention because they had heard it before. "Don't be afraid. Take courage. I am here." This is Jesus trying to remind them of the lessons and experiences that they have had to this point. They saw miracles, they heard teachings, and yet still fear was in control of them. In fact, fear even controlled them after the experience. They remained fearful to the very end of Jesus' life. And when they fast forward to the night before Jesus was arrested, we see the disciples abandon Jesus because they were afraid if they stayed too close that they might be arrested too. And then when Jesus was killed, they left because they were afraid. The next day after Jesus was buried, they were hiding in a room because they were so afraid. But then Easter Sunday came around. Jesus' tomb is empty, and then Jesus shows up in the room they were hiding in. And they realize that he's alive and back from the dead. And here's the deal. When the guy that you've been following dies and then comes back to life suddenly, everything that he said to you before seems more real, true, and believable. Suddenly, all the times he told them to not be afraid made sense. He could conquer death itself. so he can handle whatever we are going through and whatever we are afraid of. See, for the disciples, the resurrection wasn't just a nice surprise, it's everything. It made them bold, it gave them strength, and put everything Jesus said about fear in perspective. Their world was still crazy, but because of the resurrection, the disciples and anyone who followed Jesus could put their fear in its place. It was like they finally understood that the lessons from the boat, when their fear had seemed bigger than they could ever handle, now Jesus' words made sense. Don't be afraid, I am with you, took on a whole new meaning. We know this is true because after the resurrection, the disciples came out of hiding. They boldly started preaching to everyone, including the people who killed Jesus, who they were afraid of before. And these guys ended up changing the world because they listened to what Jesus had told them over the course of their time together. Don't be afraid. They lived afraid of nothing, not even death, because they followed a man who died and came back to life. All of a sudden, nothing seemed as scary anymore. Not because there was nothing to be afraid of, but because God clearly was bigger than all of their biggest fears. The thing is, we all know that fear will always be a part of our lives to some degree, but we don't have to live like fear is in charge of us and telling us what to do. Peter was one of Jesus' closest friends, and one of those disciples who was with Jesus during the miracles and the boat rides. Then when Jesus was arrested, Peter panicked and denied that he even knew Jesus when they asked him 3 different times. Then he proceeded to hide out of fear. But after the resurrection, everything changed. Fear no longer controlled Peter. So he gave some tips about fear in his letter that he writes. Peter says this, "Cast all your anxiety on him because he cares for you." When Peter says cast, he means throw them towards Jesus. These were active and intentional words. It means that this doesn't happen by accident. You have to be active with your fear. When you feel anxiety, fear, or worry, just take it and throw it to Jesus. He cares about you, and he can handle your fears. No fear you face, no matter how big, are too big for Jesus. And because of Jesus, fear doesn't have to be the boss of you. With your small group today, be bold and courageous enough to share the fears that you face. Together, you can help each other remember that because of Jesus, fear doesn't have to be the boss of you.